The pattern stock is used in a duplicating machine to create the final stock of near final dimensions. The easiest way to make a pattern stock is to start with a factory stock. Then with some bondo, a rasp, and some elbow grease, you can create a fitted pattern stock. For this project, we're using a Remington 700 ADL. There are 5 critical areas that need our attention. First is the thickness and shape of the action area from front to back, as this affects strength, appearance, and feel. Second is the length and roundness of the forend, as this affects both appearance and feel. And third is the dimension of the grip, both circumference and closeness or openness. This affects the feel as well as the control of the trigger when firing. And fourth is the length of the stock. This affects both the mounting of the gun, the comfortable positioning of the trigger hand, and to some extent, the eye relief of the scope. Last is the height of the comb, as this affects how easily the scope or sights line up as the gun is mounted. Before I can begin altering the dimensions of the stock, it must be inlet for the larger aftermarket barrel. This is not precision work, as we're creating a greatly oversized barrel channel, which we will fill in with bondo. Since I plan to glass bed the finished stock and free float the barrel, I'm adding 2 layers of bedding tape to the barrel for clearance. Now I can apply some paste wax as a release agent to the barreled action. And using a bit of bondo, bed the barrel channel. This ensures the inletting can be properly duplicated. I like to start altering the external stock dimensions at the action area. First, I measure it for width at the front, rear, and center of the action. Since I prefer the action area to be around 2 inches wide for this rifle and the sides parallel, we just need to scuff the surface of the stock. Mix up some bondo and add enough to get the desired thickness and shape. Note that I'm putting most of the bondo in the middle of the stock. One of the great properties of bondo is that it sets up quickly, so we're able to work almost right away. Now, bondo is very abrasive and will dull a good file rather quickly, so I use an old file rather than a new one. I'm using a Nicholson 49 in this case, but any coarse file that will remove the material will work fine. This job is easier if you take the time to level the stock on the center line before you start. Since the sides are designed to be parallel, we can use a level for verification. Now we can begin working the other side after leveling it off the center line. That looks pretty good. All that's left is to round the bottom of the action area, blending in the sides with the bottom of the factory stock. I clean everything up and set the top rails along the action to 1/8 of an inch width. The forend is next. On a 24-inch barrel, I prefer a 9.5-inch forend, so I'm going to shorten this one a bit. This forend's pretty flat on the bottom. My preference is for a forend that is nearly round at the tip and tapered nicely from the action, like this one. This forend is also wide and bulky, nearly 1.6 inches in diameter. I prefer a slimmer forend, about 1.3 inches in diameter at the tip. To get started, I simply make up a 1.3-inch cardboard circle. Our barrel measures 813 thousandths at the forend tip. I'll add that number to the desired width of the top rails, which is 1/8 of an inch, for a total of 1.063 inches. This width is marked on the circle, which locates the top of the template. Now I can mark the center line of the circle, then the location of the barrel channel and top rails, and cut it out. Now I can mark the forend tip. The forend should be a straight taper from the front of the action to the tip of the forend, so we'll need to remove material. I start by filing a flat on the bottom, confirming that my line is straight using a straight edge. Now I can add a bit more bondo, mark the width of my top rails, and file a flat on each side. Now each of these edges need to be filed flat. You can see at the top edge I am maintaining the rails at 1/8 of an inch. Sometimes it helps to add a little stain so you can see your progress. One more filing off of the corners, and I'm ready to carefully blend all the edges into a nearly round shape. The result is a pattern with a pleasing, slightly petite feel. Now I can concentrate on the grip area. The two most important areas are the circumference and distance from the trigger to the front of the grip cap. The circumference of most rifles typically falls in the range of 4 3/4 to 5 inches. I've made a series of dowels, the largest matching the factory circumference, which is a bit too large for me. The 4 1/2 inch dowel is just right, and the 4 1/4 feels too small. To ensure the right circumference, I'll use a grip cap of the same measurement. You'll find that generally the grip cap is nearly identical in shape and circumference to a cross section of the wrist at its thinnest part. The next project is to determine the distance from the front of the pistol grip to the middle of the trigger. Because the pistol grip on the factory stock is too close for me, as evidenced by my finger wrapping well over the trigger, I'll need to move it back so the front pad of my finger touches the trigger. I'm making a mark of 1/4 of an inch, then removing that much material from the front of the grip and trying it for fit. That's about right. Now I can file the bottom of the grip flat and install the grip cap, being sure it's in the center of the grip. Next, I blend the lines accordingly. Now I file the sides flat, maintaining the same width as the grip cap. These lines can now be blended together to carry the dimensions of the grip cap all the way to the middle of the grip. After which, I can blend the area from the rear of the action to the middle of the grip. Now I have a grip that feels good and positions the middle of the front segment of my trigger finger on the middle of the trigger. No excuses now. Let's talk about the length of pull. This is the distance from the center of the butt to the center of the trigger. It's important because it affects the mounting of the gun. If the length of pull is too short, your nose will hit your thumb each time you shoot. If it's too long, the heel will catch on clothing or your armpit and prevent fast mounting of the gun. To dial in the length of pull on our pattern stock, we can shorten the stock or add cardboard spacers if we need to add length. Now the length of pull on our pattern stock measures 13 3/4 inches, which is nearly perfect for me. Next we can address the comb and cheek piece. The comb and cheek piece determine the relationship of the eye to the scope and the sights. We're most concerned with the side-to-side position of the cheek piece and the height of the comb. To adjust the thickness of the cheek piece, we took a solid steel rod and drilled a hole down the center. With this mounted in the rings on the rifle, I shoulder the gun, pointing it at a target on the wall, with my cheek welded properly to the stock. In this case, the cheek piece is a little thick and the comb's too high. I'll remove material from the cheek piece and the comb, checking my progress as I work. It's important to move slowly, removing a small amount of wood at a time until your eye is perfectly centered in the tube. That's about right. In some instances, such as if your eye lines up like this, you may need to add material to the comb and cheek piece using bondo. Since the recoil pad needs to be removed before I send the stock to the duplicator, we'll install this wooden spacer. First, I remove the factory recoil pad, the white spacer, and scrape away any remaining glue. Now I can locate the screw holes, drill pilot holes, and screw on the spacer. Once the spacer's in place, I can address the toe line. I'm using a rasp to remove material and a straight edge to check my work. I continue removing material until the toe line is straight. Now using a pair of round files, I can clean up the area right behind the grip cap. Since the wooden spacer is a bit wider than the buttstock, I'll file it down to match the buttstock. Once that's done, I can tie the grip into the buttstock. You can see there's a bit of a high spot on the grip. I'll strike a line from the grip to the center of the butt and file it flat. Again, using a straight edge to check my progress. Now I file 2 additional flats, one above and one below the center flat. After filing those out, I'll repeat the process on the other side of the stock. The flutes need to be scuffed so I can fill them in with bondo. I'll also fill in the rear swivel stud hole at this time. After cleaning up the bondo, I mark the location of the new flute so that they are around 1 3/4 inches in length and point toward the toe. A round rasp is used to cut the flute so it's about 1/4 inch below the comb. Once the flute's cut to depth, we can remove this fat area below it and blend the flute into the grip. This process is repeated on the other side, so there's about 1/8 inch between the flutes. I'm using a small file to reshape the point of the comb. Pretty good. Now I can detail the stock by rounding the sides and smoothing everything up. Since we still have a series of flats, I just need to file down the corners and blend everything together to get a nice rounded buttstock. If you prefer a palm swell, which I do, it's a simple thing to apply a small amount of bondo to the palm area, lay some thin plastic over the bondo, then shoulder the stock and squeeze until the bondo fills the palm of your hand. It's best to go slow, adding small amounts of bondo until the grip perfectly fits your hand. Now I can clean it up a bit. This will increase the circumference slightly, but won't change the position of your hand. Now we have a nearly perfectly fitted pattern stock that's ready to be sent to the duplicator.